The next period that we're going to discuss in Chinese art history is the Warring States period. The Eastern Zhao never had the power or prestige that the Western Zhao had, and this was actually part of Confucius's point. By 480 BCE, the Eastern Zhao fell from power, and China entered a period called the Warring State period, which lasted from about 480 to 221 BCE. It's basically a period that the states or warlords battled over control. During this period, warfare had a frequent, if not daily, presence in the lives of the people living in this area. Finally, in 221 BCE, the Qin came to power. It is from this name, the Qin Dynasty, that we get the English version and European version of China as a term for this area. The Qin came to power and reunited China under King Qin. Historically, Qin had a pretty brutal reputation. He made himself emperor basically by killing all of his rivals and putting an end to the Warring State period. When he comes to power, he gives himself a new title, and this title is Qin Shi Huangdi. Huangdi means something like magnificent ruler, so it's clearly totally humble dude, right? Or it also can mean magnificent god. Remember that the chief Shang deity was called Di. So Shi Huangdi was obviously a megalomaniac. He was very capable at the same time, though. He was very capable, very powerful, and ruthless. He is also said to have been very paranoid. He was fearful of assassinations and rebellion. I mean, this kind of makes sense since he's coming out of this Warring State period. So, in addition to having this desire to be, in charge, to be powerful and reuniting China, or at least gaining territory, he was also very concerned with seeking immortality. He wanted to attain immortality. He was a legalist, and legalism is a type of philosophy in ancient China that believes that human beings are more inclined to do wrong than right because they are motivated entirely by self-interest. Legalism argues that human beings are essentially bad because they are inherently selfish. It argues that no one, unless they are forced to, would willingly sacrifice for another person. According to this concept, it would be in one's best interest to kill another person that would most likely be killing you. So, in other words, to prevent such deaths, a ruler had to create a body of laws that would direct people's natural inclination of self-interest to the good of the state. So basically, Shi Huangdi had a very grim, negative outlook on life and people. Legalism arose as a philosophy pretty much because of the violence and chaos of the Warring State period. It's basically absolutism, which we see in Europe as a philosophy or a concept as well, where the ruler has absolute, unchallenged power. Once Shi Huangdi came to power, he set about organizing China to his liking. He made legalism the official state ideology, and he went as far to not only just endorse this as the official state ideology, but also he burned all non-legalist books. So both Confucianism and Taoism suffered at the hands of Shi Huangdi and his philosophy, legalism. So just to kind of demonstrate the extreme measures that he takes in the name of his philosophy and his to support his rule over the area, in 212 BCE, he buried alive more than 400 scholars, intellectuals, who would not reject their non-legalist beliefs. So basically they were like, no, we're not legalists. And he's like, fine, bury you alive. He also literally worked people to death on many of his building projects. So he is viewed kind of negatively in a lot of histories. However, he did do some good things. He standardized Chinese script. He standardized coinage, weights, measurements, and also the axle links. Now, like, you're like, cool, who cares about axle links? Okay, the whole script, that makes sense so that people can read, Chinese wherever they are throughout his territory. Coinage and weights also make sense. You want to have that standardized. But why do we care about axle links? Well, before you had to change wheels if you entered a new part of the kingdom. This was a way of controlling trade and movement in the region. So you're in your wagon, you want to go trade with somebody else, you have to stop. If you're right before you enter the next kingdom, you have to stop, change your wheel and axles, and then get back on your wagon. That kind of takes a lot of time. It's super annoying. So it was basically a security measure, and this was especially important during the Warring State period. But he standardizes axe links so that you don't have to do that, and it encourages trade between the regions. He is responsible for several building projects, including palaces, his tomb, and roadways. He also established the basic model for governmental administration that China would follow for the next 2,000 years. One of the pieces of controversy with Qin Shi, at least in the scholarly world anyway, is that it's a debate on whether he is responsible or not for the Great Wall of China. Your book even mentions his involvement in the Great Wall. They kind of tiptoe around it by saying that, quote, he laid the foundation for the creation of the Great Wall. Well, what does that mean? Historians have recently asserted that the Great Wall of China was actually built during the Ming Dynasty, which dates to 1368 to 1644 CE. Both the Zhao and the Qin Dynasty did build walls, but these walls were scattered about many different areas in northern China and were not connected as one continuous wall. So if you go to Wikipedia, it'll talk about the Qin construction. This is actually not confirmed historically. The Great Wall is also not visible from space. This is a statement based on myth that was in circulation before the 1930s and before the age of space travel. So now you know, when you're at your fancy dinner party and someone randomly says, oh, but you can see the Great Wall of China from space. Now you can correct them and come off as a super awesome know-it-all and just wow everyone by saying, actually, it is not viewed from space. So both the contributions of the Qin and the statement that it can be seen from space are still very popular views today. Also, kind of an interesting little tidbit is that when Marco Polo visits China, he doesn't mention any long walls in his 13th century travels. So this kind of supports the whole idea of the Ming Dynasty really being when the Great Wall of China comes to be. Here's just another view of the Great Wall of China. So he might not be responsible for the Great Wall of China, but Qin Shi did leave behind his great elaborate tomb. He began building his own mausoleum in Lintong before he united China, and it continued after his death till a rebellion ended the dynasty in 206 BCE. He actually dies in 210 BCE. Before the 1970s, Qin Shi was remembered as a destroyer of culture, quote, an ogre who burnt the books and buried the scholars, unquote, a brutal warlord, and the man to take the title of first imperial sovereign of China. He really wasn't associated with any grand art or culture. But all that changed in March of 1974. Some farmers were digging a well, and they discovered what has become known as Shi Huangti's terracotta warriors. The warriors are actually a part of Shi Huangti's tomb and are located in Lintong, which is near modern-day Xi'an. This image shows Shi Huangti's massive tomb complex. His tomb is marked with the number 2, right here. That's where his body was located. It might still actually be located there, although some legends report that it was damaged by a ruler seeking revenge after his death. The terracotta soldiers are located in 3 pits, less than a mile from the actual tomb complex. So in this image, we can see number 6 over here. Today, this is what the complex looks like. The mound is the tomb, and the bottom image shows the museum that holds the terracotta warriors. So here is the tomb. Here you can see it here as well. And then in here, you can actually, that's what holds the terracotta warriors today. Now, the mound was always known to have been the burial of Qin Dynasty, but it was never opened by archaeologists. According to a historian of the later Han Dynasty, whose name was Sima Qin, he dates from about 135 to 86 BC. The tomb was constructed by 700,000 workers, and the mound stood over 600 feet high. So this historian from the late 1st century BCE describes the construction of this tomb. So the tomb itself is believed to be an underground palace. In construction, workers dug a gigantic pit measuring some 820,000 square feet. This was dug in terraces to a depth of more than 100 feet. Archaeologists estimate the subterranean palace built at the bottom of the pit to be about 400 by 525 feet. This is the size of more than 3.5 football fields. After the vault, side chambers, and passageways were in place, the pit was covered with earth and then topped with a terraced mound. Some accounts describe the emperors being dressed in jade and gold, with pearls in his mouth, and his coffin floating on a pool of mercury. The vaulted ceiling was covered by the constellations of the night sky made of pearls. Again, this is a description. We don't know today. The floor was covered with a miniature landscape of his empire, with models of pavilions and palaces, and the tomb was lit by whale oil lamps. The entrance to the tomb and to the vault were booby-trapped with hair-trigger crossbows. Again, at least they are said to be. So today, actual tests have confirmed there was a presence of unusual amounts of mercury, up to 100 times above the normal under the mound. So up to 100 times more than would be expected in this area. So that does kind of suggest that there indeed could be a pool of mercury beneath this mound. Today, of course, we know that mercury is very poisonous, but during Shirwangdi's time, it was thought to be part of an elixir that would extend life. Some accounts actually claim that Shirwangdi died of mercury poison because he was drinking it in small doses as an attempt to extend his life. Because again, he was kind of this paranoid person, obsessed and terrified of death. The presence, or at least the possible presence of mercury, is one of the reasons why archaeologists believe that the tomb is intact and unlooted. The argument is that if it had been opened and looted, the mercury would have evaporated. Now, we can only speculate about what is inside the tomb, but we know that grave goods and the entire burial complex was meant to replicate the standard elite burials of the Qin Dynasty. Even today, the tomb itself remains unexcavated because the Chinese government wants to excavate the tomb properly. So they want to have the money, the resources, the technology, everything that they'll need to preserve the tomb as much as the tomb as possible. And they don't believe they're at that point yet.